Let me know if that's not correct.
Nope, everything looks good from this end.
All right, cool. So what I can do, we can go through this real quick. I had to do this anyways to prep for what I expect to be multiple dog and pony shows over the coming weeks from with other offices, um, both internal to National Ocean Service, because we have like 6 or 8 program offices that all kind of like are in a silo, like I alluded to last week. So NCOS is my office, National Center for Coastal Ocean Science. We kind of took the lead on moving our on-premise inventory to Azure. Um, and so, starting next week, I'll be catching up our other program offices on what we've done and lessons learned and how we're doing it. And we also recently stood up like a cloud change control board and some other things that are just, kind of just getting off the ground. Um, so that's basically, I basically had to prepare all this anyway. So today's good timing for me to run through this with you, and we'll see if it's something that you guys might be interested in for me to bring to, other people in your office or whatever. I don't have a problem doing that.
Okay,
Um,
that's good to know.
the background, because I tailored this for NOS, they're already going to be aware of when we bought Azure, how we bought it, and some of those steps. I don't have that in those slides here, but basically last July, we bought a subscription, it's called, to Microsoft Azure. You front load the contract. It's a task order act. It's not even a task order. It's actually like a line item on our enterprise agreement with Microsoft. And you basically add a line item and say, hey, I want X dollars of Azure. In our case, we funded $100,000. And then you start consuming as you provision an Azure resource, whether it's whatever type of resource, doesn't matter. You then start consuming as you use it. So it's like a debit balance, basically, that you draw down on. So I won't get into all that, but certainly if your office has, if there's interest on your end about how we did that, what our burn rates are, what we learned just on the contractual side, we can have those conversations as well. But basically, I was just going to rip through what my office did the last few months, how we did it, and what we learned, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay. I put in this slide here just because before I came to NOAA, I was taking training on Agile, Scrum, project management, and I think it's something that I wanted to put the slide in for management at National Ocean Service because I've heard them say the word Agile. Not sure anyone really knows what that means, so I'm trying to put some context to how Agile software development is different than what they're used to. So this is just, I just pulled like a slide from they call it the Agile Manifesto, but it's kind of like how the Agile world works as opposed to waterfall / old school project management where people think they can sit in a room for 6 months and come up with good requirements and then come up with a project plan. And, what I mean? It just doesn't work that way anymore.
Yeah.
So that's that slide. Here's what I think is going to be cool. And again, this is my office. This is one program office at NOS. We are taking the 100% platform as a service approach. We don't want to ever manage a server, a virtual machine, a network. We don't want to manage any of that anymore. So we want to port all of our on-premise, as much of our on-premise workload as we can to platform as a service. Now, what we do know is other offices that won't always work. If there's custom products that have been built, even something like an Azure GIS license server, there's things like that. If those go into Azure, those would have to run on a VM, and you're using some infrastructure in Azure. It's virtual. You're not having to buy hardware, but it's still a virtual machine. Other offices are running Red Hat, Ubuntu, and Windows VMs up in Azure, but then they have to manage it and patch it, the typical thing a sysadmin has to do. My office, we're trying to get out of that business. We just want developers to move code and data up and then use the Azure PaaS offering to serve to store, serve, and process that data. So basically, this slide is just showing Azure has something called resource groups. That's kind of like containers for your resources. You can do role-based access to and from that. We're basically provisioning app services, which might be more commonly called a web app, Azure SQL databases, and Azure storage accounts. I can get into storage accounts later, but storage accounts can be everything from blob storage to table storage to queues and some other crazy stuff. But basically, it's just thousands of terabytes of available storage for you to put your files or backup. And I'll get to that on the next slide. So here's an example. One of my web apps is for my office's public-facing products. So behind the scenes in Azure, it's called Coastal Science-products.web. To the public, I'll just pull up the browser here. This is all in Azure now. To the public, it's a web app, right? Like you see here. Oops, let me turn off Google. We have biomappers. So, our GIS programmers would have built maps, but we moved those up to Azure. Okay, I like them like that. So this is all running directly out of Azure. And in some cases, we build custom websites, web apps. Oops. Like this, where we can search for data sets. So there's dozens of these that we're moving up, product by product, database by database. So here's one that just went live. We had to rebuild this week. I have to find national stats and trends. It's under data collections, long-term monitoring. Bear with me. So
this is basically these apps are just JavaScript. Is that the idea, or?
So we're .NET. We use .NET, PHP,
PHP.
Some HTML. We're not a heavy Java office, but Azure supports all of that. You can run whatever you've coded in up there. I forget. Some offices, and this is where NOS. It kind of depends on whoever's been running their development shop over the years. My office is mostly .NET. But when we got into things like some of our content management systems, we definitely got into PHP, jQuery. We kind of start dabbling in it. Luckily, all of that works up there, and you don't have to do a whole lot of rebuilding. So this is a .NET application here, and we just built the back end of it. It's an Azure SQL database with a couple million records. This is scientific data collected over a couple decades. And this is just a simple, it's selecting a data set, down filtering it, and, geographic area. We didn't want to do this as a map. A lot of people are like map-centric. In this case, it was just kind of getting the stakeholder right to the data. So this just went live like yesterday, actually. And then I can download it and blah, blah, blah. So all of that is running as part of, we have our web app is where our code goes. We have multiple databases serving data to that web app. So there's connection strings on the web app side. It connects to the Azure SQL database. And then over here, we use storage accounts to place our backups of our web apps and Azure SQL databases. Or we have public-facing storage where when we get into files that kind of go outside of a web app or database, like we plan to put our larger data sets, media files, video, PDF attachments that are in some of our products, those are going to move to a storage account and be served to the public that way. But it's all PaaS. There's nothing to manage in terms of infrastructure or, all of those things that so many people still struggle with. Basically, that's kind of the highlight. Here's what we just flipped the switch on, this week.
So if I wanted to find one of those files, what's the mechanism? Is there a web page as a search engine, or how does it go about?
Awesome question. So let's hop over to the portal. Our intention is that we would serve it through a web app because this isn't these products are intended to be served through a web app. So, but let me dig right into a storage account for you. You can see the portal on the left, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So here's where we're going to be dropping. This is a storage account, and this is our blob storage, and I'll just show you. You can get access to this with, hold on, it'll make sense in a second when this comes up. The one complaint I have is the Azure port. They made this portal incredibly robust and user-friendly, but it's slow. And it's still actually in preview, but this is kind of how Microsoft's rolling out the ability to manage your resources. The hardcore guys, they're using PowerShell and stuff behind the scenes. So you get these access keys, and then here are the connect strings. So if you give the access key to someone and the connect string, you can script access to it, or again, we might just create to the public. We'll probably, in most cases, we plan to just have a web app layer between the user and the actual file. Behind the scenes, it's all in these blob containers. This is brand new. I mean, some of this functionality just came out in Azure, and so we're learning it as we go. And in some cases, we're going to be working with a weather service NSEP office. They're going to use a Python script to send their files over to us, to a blob container in Azure Storage, and then publicly, it's basically a video file of the Vibrio forecasting models. And publicly, we're going to have a website. Actually, let me see if I can find it. We already have it mostly built. Sometimes I struggle finding stuff on my own website, which probably isn't a good thing.
Yeah, similar with us in VLab.
So let me just Google NCOS Vibrio forecast. Google's usually my friend. Should have been my first choice. Well, actually, this will take me to the Weather Service site, I think. But that's oh no, here, good. So what we're working with in the NSEP office is, so right now you can see that we're linking to the NSEP website, which for some reason requires a username and password, even though this is a public website. So this, and I forget what that username or password is, and this is the whole frustration like everyone has. They want, this is like intended to be a public model. So we're going to work with a sysadmin there. He's going to generate a Python script that's going to drop it into a storage account. And on this web page, we're just going to pull that file he drops in. We're just going to present that as a video file. Let me see if there's ever a link. I just can't remember what that NSEP.
Yeah.
So yeah, to the public, it's going to just be a link, a URL. Mm-hmm. That is sort of innocuous to them.
So from your perspective, how do you upload it? Do you just, is it a drag and drop kind of approach? Or
okay, that's a great question. So some people, you can use PowerShell, you can use Python. What we actually bought, it's called Azure Cloudberry Storage. It's a third party. It was like $30, and we map drives locally to our machine. I don't know how long I'm going to get away with this with security people, but we basically map the Azure storage account. It looks like a network drive we're mapped to. You have to enter that access key I showed you, that storage key, and your credential. So it is two-factor, and then it's drag and drop. So when we're moving files up to Azure, we're dragging and dropping it up into the storage account. Linux, Red Hat guys are going to hate that, and they're going to rather script it, right? And that's fine. it depends. But yeah, we just bought it a couple weeks ago as a third-party tool. The company, it's Cloudberry. Let me just show you. I don't have it installed on my Mac at home. I have it installed at work. It's called Cloudberry Drive, I think. Works for Amazon and Azure. So it was Cloudberry Drive Desktop for Windows. Bought like, I forget, 10 licenses, and you can see down here. It can work for a couple of the cloud products out there. So,
gotcha.
And then the storage, of course, back to the portal. It's a container, right, of blobs, files, tables, and queues, and then you choose which Azure data center it runs in. There's 19 or 22 of them in the world. We run it in East US 2, which is in Virginia, but we replicate the data to the central US data center in real time.
Okay.
These are all the things that you can't easily do on premise. You just,
right.
I mean, you can, but it costs tens of millions of dollars.
Mm-hmm.
So for a couple bucks a month per gigabyte, put it up here, and there's your DR. There's your disaster recovery. So we also use storage. Here's our internal storage account. So this isn't publicly accessible. This is just accessible to my team. This is where we drop our backups of our databases, our web apps, our logs, audit logs, all that crap you have to keep. So you can go in here and see, well, here's our web logs. And for each web app I'm running, so if I go into coastal science, blah, 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 you get the idea. These are all of those web traffic logs we're required to keep. And I don't feel like drilling down too far, but you get the idea. Somewhere down here, I eventually will find a log file I can open. Right here. CSV. I can just download it directly here, or through that Cloudberry drive I showed you. I could just pull it directly, just like I'm using Windows Explorer. And then in this case, it was an error that was generated, it looks like on the 25th of February, failed to read something, blah, blah, blah. Something we probably didn't know. So back to the slide, you got internal storage, you got the ability to serve data publicly, you got your web app where you're dropping all of your whatever code your team builds in. We create virtual apps and directories under a single web app with connection strings down to the different Azure SQL databases. On the SQL side, are you guys SQL Server over there, or Oracle, or what kind of databases are you running?
We use Postgres.
Okay. So let me Google Postgres on Azure. Okay, so in that case, just based on a 2-second Google search, you would run that on a Red Hat, or you're Red Hat there, right?
Yeah,
Okay, so you would just, if you were to run this in Azure, it would run on a Red Hat virtual machine.
Okay, so this is where we have to get into managing our own VMs then at that point.
Yeah, for now. So where Microsoft's at with PaaS, of course they made SQL Server PaaS, right? It's their product. There's sort of a PaaS offering for MySQL in the marketplace, and then they're trying to pull more and more things. They even have, let me go back to the portal. So like if I create a new, they might have Oracle as PaaS by now. Let me look. It changes every 5 seconds.
That's a good thing and a bad thing.
It makes security people kind of lose their mind, but in terms of like capability, it's hard to keep up with. So on the Oracle side, so even if you have to run it on a server, they actually build the images for you. So here, Oracle Database 12.1. I won't click create, but is a next gen, blah, 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 blah. Looks like that might still be, like, expect you to be provisioning a VM to run it on. But you see all the choices. Let me go to object relational DB management system with blah blah blah. So like you don't have to start from scratch with this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. So in this case, this is interesting. It looks like whoever helped build this image, it would build it on an Ubuntu server. So if you wanted it on Red Hat, you know, you would upload your Red Hat image. So like at NOS, again, not my office, but we do have a heavy Red Hat requirement up in Azure. So what a couple of our offices, actually one office especially, they uploaded, I don't know if I'm going to find it, they uploaded and configured a Red Hat image to Azure Storage, and whenever they need a Red Hat VM, they just like in 2 seconds create the VM, use the image that they've uploaded to provision it, and in 5 minutes they have a Red Hat CIS benchmark compliant server running in Azure, like on demand. And then when they don't need it, they just shut it down or kill it off. So over here, I don't want to like touch any of this stuff, but so here's like they're doing their continuity of operations, so their disaster recovery failover. So they're running Red Hat VMs up there, or will be. To handle that. And again, all the data is in Azure Storage, that stays, but they're spinning up and down VMs on demand as they need processing. So in case of my office, I got half a dozen plus websites, a dozen production and SQL databases, another dozen in the works. We're using 3 storage accounts. I showed you 2 of them, internal, public. This developer one's the one that the NCEP office would be using to drop files in for us. So it's like external developers that we're ingesting data from. We would have them write their files to another storage account, and then we would just pull it over from there. Internally, we created our cloud oversight, for lack of a better word, is brand new. Well, I assume it is anywhere, right? Like, it's not like it's been around for very long. So we just set up a change control board, like I talked about, where we submit the request for new resources. So I have, and then we have, I try to document an implementation checklist of 40, 50 things to making sure, that all of our ducks in a row before we flip the switch. So it's things like passing our security scans, making sure the backups are configured, blah, blah, blah. I can show you guys all that if you're interested down the road.
Right.
On the security side, we bought a tool from Acunetics to run our web app scans. So if we have a new set of code, we put it up in Azure, put it into like we call it a staging area. We use deployment slots. You got development, staging, production. Once it's in staging, we then run an Acunetics scan against it, and our developers can fix the code on the fly. Rescan, get it clean, deploy. I don't know how other offices scan. Before, we wanted something that our developers could actually launch on demand. So as they code, they can get their vulnerabilities identified up front. What's happened in the past is a developer will code something for a couple months, test it, get with a user, the typical software lifecycle, get with a user, the user says, yeah, that's cool, and then before you're ready to flip the switch, all of a sudden it goes to an alternate security person that hasn't been involved in the process. That person runs a scan, and then you get a result, like in a PDF or whatever, and that person's like, oh, you got these 500 vulnerabilities. Then the developer has to go back. So we wanted to change all that, and we want the developer to be able to assess vulnerabilities while they code.
Yeah.
So I think that's a no-brainer. People look at me like I'm crazy when I say that, but
no, I mean that sounds like a smart way to go. How's it working? Are they?
It's working great. So it's the first time our developer, and I only have 4 or 5 developers. But it's the first time they felt like they had the ability to fix code while they were coding to meet this ambiguous definition of what security is. So there's false. And this tool we bought is very specific to websites and things like WordPress. It's not like the kind of tool that would run against virtual machines. This is running against website code, web app code. So it's a game changer for us. It's kind of the whole agile thing. You should be coding very quickly in these short sprints, and you don't want to wait 6 months into a project to code, to check for vulnerabilities. So,
right.
It's a tool I'd be happy to show people at some point. I found out about it kind of by accident from another office that loved it. I had them run a scan against one of our applications, and our developers went, "Let's get it." It's a couple $1,000. It's just a no-brainer. The other things we're doing, so again, platform as a service, so there's not as much you have to worry about in security as you do with infrastructure. But then we also, Azure has SQL firewalls, so you configure which IP addresses can touch SQL. So that's pretty cut and dry. We have audit logging on. We have something brand new that just came out last week. I'll show you back in the Azure portal. I think this is this is brand new. This came out, I want to say 2-3 weeks ago. So here's a SQL Server. I know you don't use SQL Server, but this is what the Azure flavor of your database would look like. You can configure threat detection alerts. So Azure will automatically send you an email alert if it thinks there's like a SQL injection. Let me go to threat detection types. Come on. I told you the portal was slow. So you see this? So SQL inject, this is in preview, right? So brand new. I'm sure there's going to be a lot more things they add to it, but we figured why not turn it on and see what type of detections we get proactively. So for example, when we ran a scan using this tool I just told you about against one of these databases, guess what happened? We got an alert saying you have, I don't know, something's hitting this database that may be a threat. It could be from, the email even said, it could be from a scan or it's an actual SQL injection effort. But we knew we were running a scan. We knew right away what it was. So we were able to document that it wasn't a real threat and move on.
And that the code works.
Yeah. Well, that's the other thing, right? It actually proved, because we just turned this on, it actually proved that it works. Our code actually stopped the inject. There was a lot of positive. That was only, I forget if that was earlier this week or late last. I think Microsoft released it like in mid-February. So it's pretty cool stuff. And here's the firewall. If you could go back to the portal, you can see the firewall settings here. And then here's the audit logging I told you about. So you can determine what events are audited, are written to an audit log in the database. Slot restrictions. I don't know, and this is something, again, as I attend, hopefully those VLab meetings, I'll pick up on kind of some of your processes. But when you talk about a web app, we create 3 deployment slots. We want to try to keep it fairly simple. Development, staging, production. We don't want to get crazy with like 6 levels of slots. So you can restrict access at each of that. So in production, a web app would be public, right? So it's open to everybody if it's a public website. But our development slot, so it's kind of like that slot of code that you're currently working on, that we only want internal, so we lock it down. And so we do that by going into, I'll just show you this. Isn't this just a whole other planet than running stuff on premise? I think it is, but
I don't have to pay for anything, so I wouldn't know really. But I could see where this definitely looks better for sure. I mean, if someone else is doing all the work, who could not like that?
Yeah. So here's a deployment slot for development, and then you can go into settings and require, and all you can do is turn on like authentication. So they have to be, I need to find it, authentication, authorization. You just come in here, Come on, God.
Have you approached them, the Azure folks, on the
Yeah,
responsiveness of the system?
they know. They're just trying to make it so I might not have it turned on right now, but I would turn on authentication. Oh, it is on. Sorry, I was just being impatient. And so here's the different means you can use to authenticate. We're currently using Azure Active Directory, but if you were a hardcore Microsoft Office 365 shop, like we all might be down the road, you would use that. And I guess if you're, there's other options I haven't gotten into. So that's how you can then require that extra layer of authentication on
So
the
can
web app.
people use their NOAA credentials to log in, or is
So no, what
that
we
what you're
did,
doing?
yeah, what we're doing in the short term, it's actually a very good question. We haven't, so what we plan to do, our domain, the NOS domain is on, we're an Active Directory shop for our on-premise authentication. We're going to actually integrate our AD domain to Azure and sync a subset of our AD accounts to Azure and log on with our CAC cards like you would want. That's
Yeah.
probably a few months away. What we do right now is this is only developers are in here at this point in managing resources, right? No one like the public, it's so when we talk about Azure, it's an internal way to develop, so it's basically developers. What we had to do as a workaround in the short term, we register their NOAA.gov as a Microsoft Live account, so they're logging in as Microsoft Live account users using their NOAA email address. But all that'll go away as soon as we figure out the Active Directory integration piece.
Okay.
The public, so depending on the web app we have, well, let me actually here. I was going to get to this.
I see it has the little the Google check block there, or whatever. I wonder if that would provide a way of.
So last I read this, you have to actually have. I actually read up on that a couple months ago. Is if we so you know how Google Apps is administered at a NOAA level for us?
Mhm.
You have to actually
Right.
have like domain admin access to our Google accounts to figure that part out. And I just give up at that point because then I know it's at a NOAA level and nothing will ever happen.
Okay.
But the technical capabilities there, right? The entire Google App Directory we have, which is what 24, whatever it is, tens of thousands of no users, could absolutely be integrated to Azure for authentication. I just knew that was above my pay grade, and
Okay.
and I've been in enough meetings at that level to know how they work, and I just instantly move on to door number 2.
Okay. It's sad, isn't it?
Because here's our Git server up in Azure. So in this case, the login is specific to we're running a product from the company's called Bonobo. It was a free Git repository. We installed an Azure web app, so it's on admin.coastalscience.noaa.gov, and we have a username, password, login, and here's all of our code. Some of our developers use SourceTree on their desktop, but basically this is where we're checking in and out code, whether it's in Azure or not. So like if I go up to here, here's some Azure stuff. Here's some of these are now products that are up in Azure. Some of these are on-premise still, right? But regardless, whether it's .NET, whether it's whatever, here's our code development Git server. And so we only have, I want to say 30, 35 users right now in it, internally, no employees. In this case, we shared code with a college we collaborated with on some software we were building. So that person is a college professor that we wanted to collaborate with. We actually used their code first. A developer on my team improved it and then wanted to share it back. So you know how NOAA for some reason has a rule against using GitHub? I'm not sure why, but we had to run Git ourselves, so this was our solution.
So how about this individual? You don't want him running rampant through all your code. Can you permission him down to just?
So the guy I had there's a guy who works for me, Kirk, works down in Charleston. He's the guy who figured all this out. So it's like all other products. There's all these teams that you can. So you see, like, here's the only people that have access across the whole thing. Me and 3 other developers on my team. Here's the repository and the access there. So the answer is, yeah, you can create a project, and that repository and that project can be only accessed by certain people. I just happen to be an administrator, so I see all of it. If I was a user that's only in this project, this is all I would see when I logged in. It's Great Lakes MWP.
So if I wanted to create, a new project, do I have to be an administrator, or can rank and file developers do that?
I think only an administrator can click this button. So what we do, and when I say we, I don't really do anything. I just talk. Kirk would come in here and create a new team repository. So say it's like whatever, harmful algal plume work group. He'd create it and then assign the contributors and hit create, and then from then on, those people would manage their code in and out. So I'm 99% sure that only admins can actually create a new repository. But that's a good question. Kirk has figured all this out over the last year, and it's becoming more and more popular, not just by our developers. A lot of these names you see on this list are scientists that generate, we have scientists that use SAS and R and all kinds of things that are above my IQ level when they work on modeling and some other things, and they were actually sharing or saving their code on like their laptop. And when they would go to work with someone in another geographic office, they didn't have a great way to share it. So this is where it's bridging that gap. Besides, of course, having change control. I mean, there's a million other benefits, right? Like when you go into a repository, I can see I can of course browse to the files, and I think if I go here, I'm not that great at this. Yeah, here you go. So here's the change history of every time the code was checked in and out, by who, when, and what they did.
Do you have a ticketing system or something, so more completely document what's going on in the big picture sense? Like, I don't know, Jira and all these other.
That's actually funny you ask. We have a help desk system currently where we get. That's a phenomenal question, and it's one that we're trying to take to the next step. Let me answer it the first way. We have a basic help desk tracking system. When a user has a problem, whether it's like their printer broke or whatever, they enter a ticket and it gets routed to either our help desk, a sysadmin, or a developer. So it's your typical ticketing solution. What it does not do a good job of is what Jira does, which is integrates software development lifecycle, including Git. Jira has its own Git product. I think it's called Bitbucket. And Jira does a great job with agile development. So we get by with what we have. We do a good job on the code side with this Git server, but you can see that it does not link to an end user trouble ticket, right? Like we don't have that traceability. So I actually just proposed 2 weeks ago, roughly, that I would like to buy Jira for my office. And we found that some offices are using Jira. Some are using it just for software development. Some are actually using it for like enterprise workflow. And so it's the typical NOAA, like everyone's all over the place. Some people are doing really cool things with Jira, and I think it's time that, especially in a couple months, we might not be able to focus on it until next year, but Jira is something that I think is the next level we want to take our capability to.
Cool.
So yeah, that's a great question. So, like I said, we've tackled, how but 2 years ago, our code was even all over the place. So now our code's checked in and out of one spot. But but yeah, we're lacking that ability to go from user request or trouble or bug issue, bug report
Right.
to a developer that then checks out code, attaches that ticket to the code, like you can see where there's some smart people out there that figured out how to do all that. It's just a matter of it takes time, I guess, to migrate to it. And then think about NOAA wide. Think if there was a NOAA wide Git repository, um, where every developer across NOAA had a code base that could be shared. Like, think about that. Like, and it's partially what you guys, I think, are trying to do. But we know we have offices out in the field that don't even know about what we're doing. I mean, I know they might be in their own little silo at a sanctuary or field support office, kind of on their own, right? So if they had the means to take advantage of it, I'm sure people would be interested in it.
Yeah. One other quick question. So the next step in software development is some sort of like review process. So you got a team of people, you got your sort of senior analyst or whatever, some junior guy makes a change, it gets reviewed by some of the other team members, and they give it the thumbs up, and that's when it finds its way into the code base. Does Azure provide that as well, or?
So we're doing that kind of manually right now. What we do, so again, I have a small office. There's only 5 of us. So when we have a developer that builds a new tool, we do an informal, 30-minute where the developer shows us the code. It's basically a checklist. Walks us through what they did and how. And it's basically right now, it's just me giving a thumbs up or not.
Okay.
And of course, the product owner, the main user. But it's kind of informal. We don't do this formal. My prior job was an extremely formal, no production change happened without physical signatures and test case sign off. I'm not building anything that's like mission critical enterprise. These are like scientific based content delivery type applications. This isn't a system that's affecting 3,000 users concurrently. So in my prior world, we had all that formality, and in fact, as a developer, I didn't even have access to production. So we would put it into a staging area, have to go get 50,000 signatures, sign off, test cases, and then it would get deployed. So what I would do if I was king of the world is try to find that sweet spot in between. If we're building a scientific data system where there's one product owner, it's one data set, and it's not all that complicated, you don't want to take it that level of 15 approvals. But I know there are offices that are building some crazy important stuff, right? And so it has to go through a lot of extra hoops. I have the advantage of like none of the stuff that my team builds is saving life, limb, or property. And that's a wonderful place for personally to be. I think we have a couple offices I'm aware of that are doing storm response imagery and tides and currents and things that are, and well, weather service is the best example of mission critical, right? So I think when you get into that kind of decision, you really want to make sure that the process works for the type of product you're building. So most of that's above my pay grade. Luckily, at my program office, at least for the time being, I'm kind of able to decide. I have a way I track projects here. Here's our cloud inventory. I know I'm like just bouncing around, but these are all like the resources in Azure. And here's like my kind of like sense of a checklist. Are things set up properly? Is it backed up? Are we enforcing HTTPS? Do we have the proper certificate installed? Did we pass a scan? Blah, blah, blah. Checkbox, boom, deploy. Move on to the next. So I don't know how long I'll be able to get away with that, but that's what I'm doing for now.
Uh-huh.
That's it in a nutshell. Of course, Azure has this dashboard. I now, for the first time in my career, get the full health of what I'm supposed to be responsible for. So a million alerts, charts, and insights into your application that I never had before personally. Um, Here I just
Can you
have.
see can you
Sure.
see, say you had a newly deployed application, can you drill down and see, how many users are hitting it and,
Yeah.
that sort of thing?
So you can see some charts here with the requests. So
Hmm.
so you can get, and of course we set up all of our failed connection notices as much as we could. We're learning this as we go. Failed connections, HTTP errors. If a user's clicking something that you get a file not found error. We're trying to generate that. Then let me show you this real quick. I don't know. Um, Something new comes out here every hour, so it's really hard to keep up with. But if I go to like one of the apps, um, I want to answer your question two different ways. At a developer level, we're now using these tools. Come on. Um, Oops. I gotta be careful when I click. So you can use there's live log streaming, so you can actually watch the error logs live as they're being generated. So I can come in here, and the second there's an activity that warrants writing to a log file, I see it. Like, here's a problem, actually. Probably need to look at this. We use WordPress
Uh-huh.
for some of our content management, and here's something that didn't work. Um,
Uh-huh.
so I can come. Today's the 11th, right?
Yes.
1947. The clock in Azure is Greenwich Mean Time. So I think that just happened like a second ago. Um, so our DBA or developer can take this and go debug it. Now, one of the great things Azure has, it's still in preview, so it's been buggy. It's called Application Insights, and I think this might have been what you were getting at.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to have the ability to drill down into the complete application health. It's not just alerts, it's availability and proactive detections. You can see right now, we haven't been able to figure out how to turn all of it on yet. Hold on, let me see if I have one that's working a little bit. You have to insert some code, and then it starts pulling.
Mm-hmm.
I just had a meeting about this morning. So here's like some of it. This is just a web page. But you can start to drill down. Come on. I can hear the fan on my laptop kicking in. My Mac normally doesn't struggle. So it's probably hard to see, but it is in preview. It's a very new service Microsoft released. We're trying to learn how to make sure we turn it on properly. We've actually been working with Microsoft to get this kind of fine-tuned a little bit. I think what it's going to provide is an insane level of drill down. Here you go. You can start to see it. So you see this?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So we're starting to be able to get metrics
Okay.
and figure out, if we see a problem, we think it's going to be able to take us directly to the problem, right?
Cool. Yeah.
There's another thing. I don't know if Postgres has this or not. Do those databases like self-tune? Um,
Mm.
well, let me show you. So I've never actually used that database. I've used Oracle SQL Server, MySQL. That's it. So we don't have much data yet because we just flipped a switch. But let me go into news. So it's your typical database, right? You got a bunch of tables and a bunch of rows.
Right.
So there's something new called Query Performance Insight. So it proactively is monitoring your. Oh crap! I didn't want to see that here. Oh, I'm on my development bot resource. Sorry. Give me 1 second. Let me go to production. That's why. It's a very good question. This is all the stuff, by the way, we're learning on the fly, man. This isn't like if you go take a class, by the time you get back to your office, it's already different. So it's
Do you find it? Do they have a sufficient online documentation or video tutorials, or how do you learn? You just point and click and try things?
There's two ways. When we Google Microsoft Virtual Academy, so they're spending billions of dollars on this. So they're definitely not cutting any corners. The problem is just the rate of change. So if you go out to Virtual Academy, they have a ton of great videos on how to deploy. Or it might be called, there's also like Azure Channel 9. The answer is yes, there's a ton online. The problem is you don't want to read or watch anything much older than about 60 days because it's already obsolete. So if you find an article on how to manage an Azure SQL database and it's from November 2015, don't even bother. It's done.
Okay.
If it's from January, February, or March of 2016, you're probably safe to follow it.
Yeah.
So they have a ton of cloud development stuff, and I think it's called Channel 9, Azure Channel 9. I don't know where Channel 9 comes from, but this is where I first learned a lot. Yeah, Azure Channel 9. And so they do a great job of like daily releases of videos.
Wow.
Azure App Service. So you see how that's April 2015? I wouldn't watch that. It's done. It's not even close to being like that anymore. So you just got to be careful. Azure AD from 2014, forget it. Totally different. If you see late 2015 on, and there's a million videos up here, and you can search and browse, then you're good to go. It's hard, but developers love it. We love it. I would way rather be here than working on something that doesn't change. But it is a challenge. And I highlight that in these slides I'm going to start giving. I actually put it as a positive. New functionality rolls out constantly. What isn't great is, I'm sure my slides are going to get edited by someone above me because of my tone, but traditional federal government inability to adapt to rapid changes. I worry that our paper process just can't begin to manage something like what's in the cloud. So I think that's the challenge. I think the smart people will figure it out, but I just worry about the paperwork.
Gotcha.
So that's basically it in a nutshell. So,
wow, that's amazing. You guys, what do you think? You mentioned there was 100,000 put against it. And you said there were some burn rates that you had some sense of.
So,
how long will the 100,000 go for?
Well, okay, that's a great question. Our enrollment with our current Microsoft reseller ends in May, and we have to switch to a new Microsoft reseller. It's through a Department of Commerce BPA. I think the company's called Insight. We're not going to do it quite like that in June. We're not going to put like $100,000 up front. We're trying to work with them to do much shorter because we don't really know what our burn rate's going to be yet because we are just moving stuff up now. I know what a given resource will cost. So I know if I create a website of a certain size, I can tell you the cost. I can tell you what a database will cost. But then there's charges like bandwidth. There's all kinds of egress, traffic charges. It's very complicated. I think in 6 months we'll have a good idea of what our actual burn rate is. Right now it's like changing every minute because every minute I'm throwing something new up. So what we want to do is instead of putting 100,000 back up, and we've only burnt 20 or 1,000 of it right now. It's actually hard to burn money against it unless you're running a VM 24/7. A website's a couple grand a year, a database is a couple grand a year, a storage account's a couple bucks per gig per month. So it takes a lot of volume there to start earning 10, 20, 30 grand a month. So it's a work in progress. What we want to do on the next enrollment is more like, okay, put 20 grand in to start, and then watch the burn rate, and then go, okay, now it's July. Looks like we're averaging 15 grand burn a month. Now we got to drop the next 30 on. And the other variable is I'm about to test March 20 in 2 weeks. We're going to test we're going to try to get off the supercomputer. Um, so Azure batch processing. Give me a second.
Hmm.
So instead of using that supercomputer, um, we're going to take our model and throw it up against Azure and see what a couple thousand cores will do. So that'll start burning up some cash, right?
Yeah, yeah, I would think so. So why are you
So,
foregoing the relatively free service that you currently are using, i.e.
well,
the government one?
this is just me. The problem is when you're a non-critical user, you get bumped. So you have to get in line, and you get bumped from the weather service or whoever is in front of you. So, but our science doesn't stop, right? We still need to run our models. But if there's a hurricane or what, I don't know the details, but I do know we get bumped. So, but you're also talking to someone. You're talking to someone who doesn't think the federal government should physically have a server on premise anymore.
Mm-hmm.
That's just the old. I just don't think that's the way the world works anymore. So I would rather use $10 billion of infrastructure that's already built, and just consume it as I need it. And in the case of something like this, we believe it might run 100 times faster and cost a fraction. We don't know yet. So we have Microsoft's HPC engineer that's going to sit with us in 2 weeks, and we're just going to try a model up in Azure. I'm not saying it's going to replace it's above my pay grade to determine the fate of NOAA. You're just, like I said, you're just talking to someone who doesn't think there should ever be a physical server bought by the federal government.
All right.
Under any scenario, we can't even hold a candle to what $10 billion of infrastructure can do.
Mm-hmm.
10 billion with a B.
Right.
So that's just me.
I guess at some point, though, I'm not saying this is the right way to think about it, but the government, when they provide quote unquote operational products, they got to have control over the number of people using it. For example, that you got all that Microsoft investment, but there's no doubt, no guarantee that you'll get to use it. It may be somebody else gets to, go on, and next thing you know, you're running behind in your development cycles or whatever.
Yeah. No, there's
production cycles.
You're right. There's challenges that we have to figure out. There's no question. It's just yeah. I don't know where it'll go. I do know that in my little office, and again, I am not even close to working on the types of products that are mission critical to NOAA when it comes to hurricane forecasting and storm response imagery following a flood in the Midwest. I work in an office that's doing coastal science research, and so we have to just ingest data, analyze it, build something, and serve it. And it's almost never related to, like I said earlier, life, limb, or property. I just know that I personally never want to ever have to touch something physically in a NOAA building, because it makes my head explode when I have to. It takes too long. In many cases, you always get wrapped up around, I got to buy a new RAID. The RAID drive failed. I got to rebuild it. I'm running out of space. Give me 8 months. Or how it's backed up. All of those things. For me personally, this is where I want to be. Where NOAA goes with it is a whole other story.
So does NOAA CIO, have they been championing this effort, or are they clueless about this effort, or what exactly is there?
They're aware. We went to them first last summer and said, look, this is what we want to do. They said, yeah, we want to do this too. We're going to stand up. They call it a NOAA Cloud Work Group. It just got stood up last January, February. So they have representatives from each line office. So NOS, I'm NOS. We went. That first meeting, there was like 8 of us that went. OAR had 1 or 2. Weather Service had 1 or 2. It depends. So that work group At this point, they seem to be, this is just my opinion, they seem to be Amazon-centric and infrastructure as a service-centric. So what the CIO Council did tell us is, hey, NOS, we're not going to stop you. Please go. Like, start figuring out Azure. And then I think there's some type of an agreement that we just come into the fold. But I guess I got to be careful how I say it. But I don't think anyone at that level is going to be, how do I say it, effective at deploying cloud resources that are usable at a line or program office level at any point in the next year or two. I hope eventually I think they will, because they're going to have to be. But
right. Yeah, the wheels of progress do grind slowly. I'm sure of that.
Yeah. So the good news is they know they have to figure it out, and they stood up a group of people to help figure it out. I went to one meeting initially, and I just haven't gone back because my time's better spent at a line office level where I actually have the means to provision and execute. But I'm a low guy on the totem pole, right? So like the senior people that like sitting in rooms and talking about stuff, that's probably the perfect place for them to go.
Yeah, cool. I detect a bit of cynicism here.
I live in a world, like I like deploying and building things, so yeah. I think they're trying to figure out like how to even collect a requirement from so I think what they're trying to do is go, okay, so here's an office at NOAA, whatever office, and I need to do X, Y, Z. It would then go to this NOAA central office, cloud office, and say, hey, I need X, Y, Z. That NOAA office in the CIO shop, behind it has the contractual means to use Amazon or Azure. And they would go provision the service and deliver something that then the requester can use to deploy. I think that's how they're going to do it. I just, they're going to have to try to come up with like a menu of services they can support. You can do anything you want in the cloud, right? I just showed you like a fraction of it.
Yeah.
The question is who's ready to support it up there? It's not like it's not just pressing a button. And so that's why I think their scope initially might be pretty specific, like Amazon, Linux VMs that can do X, Y, Z. Whatever that's going to be. I don't know what the biggest challenge is for NOAA to process. I know what my office's was. I know what other offices in NOS were using current NOAA infrastructure. But when you get into the OERs, the weather service, these other line offices, I have no idea what the biggest need is. So I think that's what that group's going to try to figure out over the next year or two.
Cool.
All right.
All righty. Well, I tell you what, I really do appreciate you taking the time to kind of show us what you've got going there. It's pretty impressive. So I'm sure it'll be well received when you do your formal briefings.
We'll see. So just think about it over there. Again, I know I missed this past Tuesday's VIT meeting again because we had a couple production problems. I will attend those, I promise. If there's anyone in your office that is interested in Azure, let me know. I can't speak to what NOS is doing with Amazon. We do have an office in Seattle that's using Amazon for a couple things. I just don't know how they're doing it. But if it's anything Azure related that you guys may be interested in, or how we use our Git server, let me know.
All righty. I'm glad you offered us that opportunity. I appreciate that.
All right, no problem.
All right, well, have a nice weekend.
All right, take care, man.
All right, bye-bye.